Metaphor Refantazio has received glowing reviews, and it's not easy to get 90s on Metacritic, and it's even harder to stand out in the sea of games that have come out this year. Yet, somehow, Atlus continues to show that they know what they're doing. And with every big release comes speculation of the next. So, will Persona need to learn from Metaphor? One of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because you tend to see every Atlus release learn from the last one. Now, that's not necessarily intentional, and it may not be specifically them learning after that release, but it is something that you can kind of connect. Metaphor seemingly has aspects of the previous big games, whether it's Persona 5 or Soul Hackers 2. The game's flashy, stylistic UI is definitely influenced by the success of the same concepts in Persona 3, 4, and 5. The big explorable towns and cities and larger dungeons generally are just part of a technical leap of this being an 8th gen game as opposed to a 7th gen, but you can kind of count SMT5 as paving the way for these bigger, more explorable areas. Soul Hackers 2 saw a lot of 3D model usage with different camera angles and close-ups as well. Metaphor actually doesn't touch on this as much, but it feels like it's a little more generous with the camera placement, and its 3D models are pretty good looking. There's also a certain battle mechanic that I feel like is influenced a little bit from Soul Hackers. I'm sure it's in other games as well, but I'm just using Atlus to compare Atlus. Anyways, Persona 6 is most definitely going to be using a lot of these ideas as well. I very much doubt that Atlus would abandon their UI direction anytime soon, given some of the biggest voices in game development praising it to high heaven. But does Persona specifically need to take after Metaphor? Not necessarily. A lot of this is just a natural progression of technology in video games. That said, let's look into some more specific mechanics and qualities of Metaphor that Persona could take after.
If we run into shadows, we beat the shit out of them.
One thing that Metaphor introduced is Overworld Combat. Now, it's not incredibly complex. You're not going to be doing big combos or casting giant, flashy spells. But it offers a more interactive way to get the jump on enemies, and a fast method to dispatch low-level mobs. You might not remember this, but Persona 5 already has this in the form of Ryuji's rank 7, Insta-Kill. It fits P5 thematically since you are a sneaky band of thieves. So in that sense, something like P5 would not need this mechanic. But I think Overworld Combat could find its way into Persona 6, however, it heavily depends on the thematic choices the game makes. As an example, this could work with something like Persona 3 or 4, where your team is more of a squad of elite combatants. I mean, P4 they try, but I guess elite combatants is not really the way I'd describe P4's group. But even then, a bit of Overworld Combat would probably fit a group of unorganized teenagers more than a sneaky, flashy instant kill. I don't see it as a necessity though. Adding Overworld Combat is not something I necessarily need in the game. However, it is faster than the insta-kill in P5. I think they still could keep Persona 5's version of this mechanic, especially since enemies tend to appear in 1s or 2s as opposed to big groups of 6 in the Persona games. But I'm not opposed to the addition of Overworld Combat if it fits thematically.
Bonds by becoming involved with others. Your own social links will gradually develop.
Metaphor's follower system is very similar to Persona's social links. The one difference is that in Metaphor, you can choose whichever option you want without the fear of it being not optimal. The game compensates you with Mag, a farmable resource, for picking the best fitting option, but it doesn't punish you for picking the suboptimal ones. The social link system could adopt this in Persona. It would give the players more freedom to be the person they want to be and to pick the choices they want to pick. However, I think the problem with this is that it can kind of undermine the point of the social links and Persona as a series in general. Building bonds with your social links might feel hollow if you're just allowed to be an ass about everything. And those bonds are technically crucial to Persona's core and direction. While we don't know what direction the next Persona game will take, I feel as though it's heavily unlikely that they abandon the point system overall. It still is possible that we see this in Persona 6, as P3 Reload used a choice option doesn't matter system with the Link episodes, but I'd also argue that that is more of a case of circumstance rather than a choice they made in development. If that makes sense, they still did choose not to make a point system for Link episodes. I personally hope that the social link system remains the way it always has been. I'm not opposed to the change, but the way it functions in Persona fits, especially with the amount of time you have in the game. Whether the change happens or not, it won't affect my enjoyment of the game, so as long as the choices we are allowed to choose still retain an aspect of personality for our main character. And Persona is gonna keep its combat system. I think that's a given. The pass turn system is very fun, and it does give way to create a risk and reward system for the player. It encourages good decision making and punishes rushed actions. But I think Persona should keep its one more mechanic, because not every game needs to be like SMT. The main mechanic I want to focus on though is showtimes and theurgies. This will likely be renamed in P6, but the basic function of a flashy, powerful move that does a ton of damage is something I mainly want to discuss. There are 3 existing forms of this. P4's duo attacks, which are triggered automatically at random as long as both party members are present. Persona 5's showtimes, which trigger randomly but have a higher chance when the opponent or allies are on low health, or when a baton pass occurs. And Persona 3's theurgies, which require you to fill a theurgy gauge and can be activated when the player chooses. Metaphor's take on big team attacks is called Synthesis. It consumes 2 turn icons instead of 1, and uses HP, MP, or gold as well. The key here is that they can be used at any time, so in exchange for the freedom of when to use it, and being able to use it as long as you have the resources available, the cost becomes higher. Persona doesn't necessarily need to adopt this either, but it could learn a thing or two about game balance in the process. Giving these attacks some kind of drawback is kind of essential if you want the game to be harder at higher difficulties, but I'm also not a game balance person. I don't really mind if exploiting the game's systems make it really easy, nor do I mind if the game is pretty difficult until the end. I think if we are looking at greater difficulty, then adding a drawback for these cinematic attacks is pretty much essential. P5, it's a free attack. It just takes up your turn. In the end, I'm sure Persona 6 will have its own spin on these moves. It's only a matter of time before we get to see it. But I'm hopeful that maybe they can nail some form of difficulty on higher settings this time. But I think that is a bigger discussion than just theurgies and showtimes. People like to point to one thing that makes the difficulty, and theurgies and showtimes are definitely a part of it, but I don't think they're the sole reason why Persona games are easy.
Does that mean you've got a phone?
Now, originally I had separate sections for these, but I feel like it's kind of unnecessary. I don't have a lot to say about these in general. Pretty much all of them fall under the wholly unnecessary or impeded by the fact that Persona will almost 100% either be high school or the working world in setting. You won't be some rich billionaire with time to kill. But anyways, number 1. Extra optional dungeons. This works in Metaphor because of the setting and because of the game's structure. It's possible to do this with a Persona game, but it really depends on the themes and the direction of the game. 2. Traveling. Metaphor has you spend a lot of time traveling from place to place, and I have a hard time believing this can be reasonably implemented into Persona or is even a thought. The crux of the issue being that you're most definitely a high school student or a working man. Probably more likely a high school student, which means your time to travel is incredibly limited. Again, Metaphor's story and setting allow you to go on this continental adventure, and Persona's doesn't really allow it. The only other thing is probably a class system. Being able to swap your personas and specialties for every character just doesn't seem like something that is going to come back to the series outside of the main character. There is potential for something like sub-personas where you can get certain skills on other characters using personas you fused, like in Tactica or the Q series, but I don't think that's happening for main series. I think that's going to stay in spin-offs. It would also create some crazy balance issues that we already have argued about the difficulty of Persona. It's not hard. So adding this extra stuff would not give rise to a more difficult game. It would just add customization and make the game easier. I think Persona as a series is going to continue to grow by being Persona. The similarities with Metaphor are obvious, but the two series can be their own thing even with the success of Studio Zero's new IP. It's not like Persona 5 Royal or Persona 3 Reload did poorly either. Anyways, I hope we get to see Persona 6 soon because I'm really interested in the direction it could take. And you can let me know your thoughts about Metaphor and if Persona can learn anything from it in the comments down below. As always, you can leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more things Atlus, Persona, and JRPG related. And before I end this off, I just want to say thank you to everyone who read that community post that I made about changing up my schedule and having more time to work on videos. It might not seem like much right now, but I'm hoping to learn some more things about the editing software I'm using and hopefully improve the audio of my videos, etc. Being able to actually have time to just draft multiple versions of a script has really helped me feel better about what I'm writing and what I'm putting in. So hopefully it shows, at least in the editing of the video. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh. It appears we are at a standstill.